Right.
Coyolxauhqui, the one that adorns her face in the old way, is the symbol of our project. Throughout different cultures in Mexico, she is the woman, goddess, mother, daughter, sister, or the moon. Her struggle was to have the Aztecs be the matriarchal, without sacrifice society they originally were. During the 200 years of pilgrimage to the Valley of Mexico, in order to survive, they became an eminently warrior-like and patriarchal mexicas, and human sacrifice began. Legends give her various names. Malinal Xochitl, evil woman who controls snakes, scorpions, and spiders. Chimalma, evil woman warrior who defends her young sisters from the invaders. Coatlicue, the daughter is at times her own mother. Quilatzi, snake woman, eagle woman, warrior woman, and infernal woman. We went to Mexico to learn about women there, mythical, historical, and real. To start learning about women in ancient cultures that have been conquered over and over. To understand their attitudes about life and death, their religious and their daily life, and to find out the image they have of themselves. Maria Sabina, a wise woman who lives in the Sierra of Oaxaca, chants, with the Virgin of Magdalena, with the Virgin Guadalupe, with Lord Santiago. Because I am the water that looks, she says. Because I am the woman wise in medicine, she says. Because I am the herb woman, she says. Because I am the woman of medicine, she says. Because I am the woman of the breeze, she says. Because I am the woman of dew, she says. We went to learn about their culture and their struggles. In 1978, this important image of Coyolxauhqui, showing her defeated and mutilated, was discovered. She is now re-emerging. There is a growing feminist movement in Mexico. After a first wave of feminism in the 30s, the 70s saw the re-emergence of the movement. At present, there are two major groups. Coalición de Mujeres Feministas, formed in 1976 around the issues of abortion, rape, and battered women. It is integrated by 6 feminist groups. And the Frente Nacional por la Liberación y Derechos de la Mujer, which is a national organization formed by feminists, women in opposition parties, and women in unions. It was started in 1979. Along with most feminist groups in Mexico, they consider themselves socialist feminists and see women's struggle as part of a larger class struggle. There are also many small consciousness-raising groups, a cinema collective, a feminist publication called FEM. In the past 2 years, several lesbian groups have emerged, among them Acratas and Oikiabed. Mexican feminism is definitely growing and getting enlarged every day. December 11th, 1979. We arrived in Mexico today. I am excited about showing my North American friends my country. Our cultures are so different. Our conceptions of time, love, life, death, work, our food, our celebrations are so different. As Octavio Paz says, 2 distinct versions of Western culture. Mexico is an inclusive society, has integrated through the different conquests it has suffered. The elements of both the conqueror and the conquered. The Spaniards conquered and converted the Indians, and they all became Mexicans. The U.S. is an exclusive society in which all groups live together but don't seem to integrate. I want my friends to notice this layering, the indigenous and the Spanish, the cultural imperialism of their own country, all overlapping in contemporary images, values, and lifestyles in Mexico. We are a country that has continuously suffered cultural imperialism. One country dominating us not just economically, but also the values that people have. The old pre-Hispanic religious images were transformed into Christian images. The old goddess Tonatzin became the Virgin of Guadalupe, and the god Huitzilopochtli is now known as Christ. This is all cultural imperialism. I hope my friends will also be aware of all the images that come out of their own country and are used here to sell their products. Images that don't have anything to do with our cultural reality. This is cultural imperialism.
I wasn't raised in a very strong religious background at all, but I'm aware of the power that the church has on our economy and political situation. I'm particularly aware of the influence of the church around women's issues and how it has acted to limit and restrict women's rights to choose on issues from abortion to divorce to birth control. But when we, on the 12th of December, which was the third day, we were in Mexico, we had the great opportunity to visit one of the greatest national celebrations, which is 12 de Diciembre, the Day of the Virgin of Guadalupe. The festivities were held in a large area called the Villa. This is the steps of the Villa, and on this plaza there are, you can see the remains of an old Spanish colonial church. The cross was on the newer cathedral, which houses the shrine of the Virgin of Guadalupe in the same square. Both of these were built on top of an yet older Aztec temple. And before that, the previous tribe's temple or shrine. There were 3 million people at the festival. Some of them had been walking for days from their mountain villages, all to pay homage and honor the Virgin. There were also many circles of Indian traditional dances from various regions in Mexico. But the thing that struck me most powerfully, and at first, were huge banners across the entrance to the square that were all anti-abortion. Some of them said motherhood is a sublime mission. Some of them said abortion is a crime, abortion is murder. When I was in Mexico, Monica told me a story of how abortion is one of the issues of the Mexican feminists, and a lot so that Mexican women have a right to choose whether abortion is legal or illegal. There are approximately 1 million abortions happening in Mexico, and about 100,000 women die annually. And these are some reasons why the Mexican movement has taken this on as a very strong issue. She also said that abortions are sought primarily by married Catholics who already have 4 or 5 children. But the part of the story that was the most impactful to me was that after spending months organizing, the organization got about 200 women to come to the pro-abortion, pro-right, pro-choice rally. And the next day, the Catholic Church brought 15,000 women into the street.
December 12th. We had lunch at Esperanza's, a friend of mine's, today, and had a discussion about the differences between Mexican and North American women. One of the major differences is this same imprisoning influence of the Catholic Church on Mexican women. The roles that we are forced into are clear and well defined. The archetype of the Virgin and the whore are strongly ingrained in this culture, helped by the Church. According to them, the Virgin, self-sacrificing mother, and suffering wife all have their punishment here on earth, and the whore, the witch, the rebel will suffer in hell. Either way, they condemn us all. Mothers have been put on a high pedestal, more like a prison in which they are venerated as the center of life and the family, but in which they have no real power. And whether by orders of the Virgin or of Christ, we are deprived of the control of our bodies and our lives. Women then become the transmitters, and never the creators, of values they received from family, religion, government, and other institutions created by men, and perpetuate these same values that oppress her. Potentially, though, there is a vast source of spirituality that can begin to bond women.
The family is, of course, directly related to the Church and is of central importance in Mexico. And the role of the women in the family is as mother and wife. This particular kind of social situation isn't that unfamiliar to us in the United States, but one thing that was different for me was the constant visual commercial reminders of the choice that a woman would take. Bridal shops and novias abound with all the accessories available for possibly the most exciting moment of a woman's life, her wedding. I found myself getting caught up in all the little flowers and beads and lace, and the whole repetition of it and the frequency of it really worked on me. One of our friends, Ana Victoria, mentioned that when she was about 10 or 11, her mother left the home to go to work for a couple of years for the sole purpose of getting more money for her 15 años celebration. That's a party that a young woman has at 15 that is like a coming out into society kind of party, except within her own community. And as you can see, for these occasions, the young women wear miniature bridal gowns, or in some case, miniature habits or smaller habits. One thing that struck me was, in her particular case, with her mother making such an extreme sacrifice or effort to get this money, what a kind of pressure that would put on someone, particularly if she chose not marriage. Another thing that Ana Victoria shared was that by far most Mexican women live in the family's home. And again, I thought in relationship to myself how so much of my independence is in direct relationship to my independence from my family's home.
We gave our slide presentation at the Carrillo Hill Museum the 13th of December. It was incredible that it usually takes 15 minutes to arrive from my home to the museum, and today it took over an hour. There had been a large demonstration downtown, so the traffic was absolutely insane. Mexico is boiling politically. The oil that has been found hasn't yet alleviated the poverty, and people are even more unhappy with the government. There's political graffiti all over the city and all over the country. Even the smallest towns have this graffiti against government and against American imperialism. It is scary for me to think that the government will get more repressive now. If as feminists who aren't considered politically dangerous, we have at times been followed, watched, and at times even threatened, Other political groups will really have to be careful and build strong networks among all opposition groups to defend ourselves. Anger against the US government and the corporations is also growing. Someone told me that the budget of the US government allotted for one of their latest weapons, which I don't know which one it was, is twice the gross national income in Mexico for a year. True or not, the superpowers in this stupid arm race are contributing to the world's starvation. The only advantage I see in this kind of situation in which we live in Mexico is that the relationship is clear-cut between who is the enemy and who we're fighting for, which I have found that living in the States, it's often confusing and more subtle, and no one really knows how things can be directly fought against. The day we were at the Villa, we went to the Villa today. Veneration of the Holy Virgin, a woman, and reality puts the place of women. Most women there, as elsewhere in Mexico and in other places, are poor. This is due both to the national condition and also to women's specific situation. I read some statistics today that were appalling. In 1930, women were only 4% of the Mexican working force. In 1969, only 19%. Of course, these statistics include only the so-called productive jobs. Domestic work isn't considered productive. Although Mexican laws give women equality, we have to struggle against reality. A tradition that has kept women in the house and imported values from industrialized countries that insist on seeing women as sex objects. As in other places, women work mostly in services: teachers, nurses, waitresses, secretaries. In the industry, they concentrate in the areas of food, textile, and house services. Women are separated from the rest of the working force and therefore more easily exploited. I get so angry. Laws that no one even believes, and women are still more undernourished than men, because as boys are considered more important, if there is food, they get fed before the girls. Or education. 42% of all women over 25 years old have no grammar school. Almost half the women of my age or older in my country probably can barely read, if at all. And with little education, nourishment, or rewards, the women work, support their children, educate them, and keep life in the country going on. Can you imagine what we'd do with food and education? I've often been heard about how women in Mexico must suffer awfully from macho men's exploitation and how submissive they are, the stereotype of the submissive Mexican woman. And all in all, with all these conditions, the strongest women I've seen, the most energetic, the kind of movement that is starting to grow in Mexico at the time, with women really willing to give their life, their time, their energy, their money, everything for a movement they believe in, women who keep the whole country growing. And even under these conditions, I'm really hoping for the day that the conditions are even better so that women can develop their full potential.
Tonight we finally met the group of Mexican women who came together to work on this project. They include feminist writers, artists, sociologists, and photographers. While we planned our presentations and workshop in LA, they've been working for the past months on all of the arrangements and publicity. Initial shyness is compounded by the language barrier, but soon we're all doing our best to communicate however we can. You all know these two are. Lilia was the first who greeted us and warmly took us into our home. And it was really wonderful to see Lilia and Monica collaborating together there at their own table. There was still a lot of work that needed to be done, and Lilia, who on her telephones, became a very familiar sight to us. As that meeting progressed,
Arrangements for the upcoming weekend workshop were finalized. I turned in and out of the Spanish.
Sometimes comprehending the gist without understanding the words just by watching the women's faces and gestures. There is some confusion and disagreement about what we will be doing at the workshop, and after much discussion, it seems to get cleared up. It's becoming clear to me that our experience of feminist education that we've planned to bring is very different in this context, and I wonder what will come of our interaction. Translations. When we took that word as a name, I didn't realize how right on it would be.
December 13th, around 30 to 40 people came to our two talks at the museum. We presented two lectures, one each evening. The first was the contributions of women in art history, with emphasis on European and Americans, and the second evening a presentation on feminist art in Southern California. The questions from the audience were varied. Some men and women acknowledged the great accomplishments of women. Some stated the importance of art in political movements. One woman had never been to a women's gathering before and questioned why it was important for women to meet together. Others asked what the platform of the women's building community was. Yeah, that was a question that was to come up a couple times again and had us all stumped for days. Somewhat because of the political language and also because of the different ways of struggling. 2 days before our talks, we still did not have a slide projector. It was something that we would not have guessed beforehand. The presentation was in a museum, and we were simply unable for a long time to find amongst artists or friends or the museum the slide projector. And what was particularly interesting to me about that was that it gave me real quickly a consciousness about the difference in technology and how accessible some things are to us here and how expensive and inaccessible they were there.
I'd also like to add that, as many of you know, we did a fundraising here that was to have artwork from women here sent to Mexico, and the amount that Mexican women had to spend on getting the boards, the panels to put the work was at least twice as much as what we were able to get here. But fortunately, the women in Mexico did a lot of fundraising and extremely wonderful organizing so that it could all work together.
December 15th, Cuernavaca, finally the day of the conference. It was held at the house of Nancy Cardenas, who is a feminist theater director. And a few nights before, we had just seen a play of hers, an adaptation of Colette's Claudine at School. Many of you are familiar with that. It has very strong lesbian content, and it was to my surprise and delight to be sitting in Mexico City and seeing this play by this feminist director. 70 women came to our conference for the weekend from all different parts of Mexico. There were artists, political activists, therapists, feminists, and some women who had never experienced feminism before. We had a small gallery set up to display the work of the women that we had brought with us, and the women in Mexico to display their work. One thing that struck me in hanging our work was how much of it was the written word. That was real interesting. Although a lot of it was translated, some of it was not, and it was just a real funny thing to be hanging English up, and how much of our work depends sometimes on the written word, and to think about that in terms of sharing cross-culturally. the organizing committee in Mexico City had put an extreme amount of energy, time, and just plain hard work into making all of the arrangements for us for the conference. They had done all the publicity, they had arranged a space, they had done fundraising, they had made the brochure, they'd handled all the registration, and it was very powerful, and the compañeros, they felt like very strong compañeros for us. I also want to say that many of the women in the organizing committee and the participants at the conference were lesbian women, and that was also a delight. There was some amount of confusion as the conference was in process about exactly what was supposed to be happening. We had come with the information that a group of feminist artists in Mexico City wanted a presentation on feminist art, and that we would come with what skills we had learned at the Women's Building in the feminist education process and share them through exercises and different work sharings with the Mexican women, and then Mexican women would exchange what work was being done there. As we got there and things began to happen, some discontent began to arise, particularly in a community of more politically active feminists who had come thinking this was a women's conference where all different organizations and committees in Mexico would come, and there would be readings of papers and exchanges of platforms and philosophies and aligning and getting closer that way. So expectations crossed midair, and there was some conflict that came up. Another thing that I want to share that was particularly interesting to me was in the second day's slide showing, we shared work from the recent show at the Women's Building, Bedtime Stories, Women Speak Out Against Incest. And a lot because of the people I know and the information that I've been exposed to, in presenting the slides, I spoke out strongly against incest. And there was response from a couple women who wanted to let me know that they were working on a concept of incest that was radically different than what we were presenting. That was a concept of a loving relationship between two sisters and a loving relationship between a mother and a daughter. And she gave us some strong criticism on speaking so blanketly about incest. And I share that because I learned from hearing that about how to clarify and be specific and tell what my point of context is, and so I wanted to
Well, it feels very familiar and very different to be here, a gathering of women such as many that I've been in. Since a conference having anything to do with feminism is rare here, it seems all the feminists have come, not necessarily artists, and also women who've never been to any all-women's event before. Energy is high, the women are intense with a lot to say and to share. I see women connecting with each other for the first time and renewing old contacts. It becomes obvious that we've come into a situation where there's also a history of personal and political differences. I feel under a lot of pressure and know that Monica, Jo, and Florence are feeling it too. We're not connecting, and that's making it harder. After lunch, we meet in CR, finally letting out some of our feelings. After going through our own process, we return to the larger group, drying our eyes, to facilitate the afternoon CR and journal work. The evening's performances were fantastic. I feel like they're gifts in return for the energy we've put out. Sunday is packed with discussion and issues. What is feminist art? What is your political platform? We each speak for ourselves. The questions really force me to think and consider my words carefully. In the closing critique session, we asked what worked and what didn't about the weekend. One problem seems to be the varying expectations about what was planned. It occurs to me that our workshop was not so much of a real collaboration with the Mexican women organizers because of our being 2,000 miles away from one another until 5 days before. By the end of the weekend, it seems we've been together for days. I've gone through every emotion from intense pain to elation.
The workshop was very difficult. We had to translate not just the language, but the deeper political language, which the different groups are used to communicating in. In Mexico, there's a more political, sociological language, whereas in Southern California at the Women's Building, there's a more psychological, political language. We had clashes because of this. There was one woman, among others, who refused to participate in the workshop because, as she told us, she felt like we were engineers and coming with this high technology where you do process work and you push someone's button and expect them to come out with a result on the other side at the end of the afternoon. Another one of the problems we had that seems relevant to all feminist groups that gather this way is the different levels that women come in. We had women who had never been to an all-women's reunion and who did not consider themselves feminists, and women who started struggling in the 40s and 50s in the Communist Party and had developed a long political career towards very radical feminism. So that was another thing we have to think more about in the future. Even so, the women who participated in the performances were able to combine these two languages and make their work from it. We'd done a series of journal exercises in the afternoon that led to the performances. We'd done journal work about who was their enemy and having a dialogue with their enemy, and many of the women came up with social enemies, the system and the government, etc., and other women came up with their personal inner enemy who did not let them work as much as they want to. For me, this part of the workshop, the actual doing work together and the showing the work from the different countries and having it together in the same exhibition was probably one of the most powerful things because it crossed cultural barriers that had been difficult to jump over in a more political dialogue. It was also a unique opportunity for me to share with women in my both worlds what it was like on the other one. It was wonderful to have women from the United States so that now I could say, aha, when I'm asking about political things, now you know what I'm talking to, because the whole language in Mexico is so political, and when I'm talking to my friends in Mexico, now I can say, aha, now you know the context or where all this is coming from. So that is a wonderful treat that I hope to continue and to have this dialogue become deeper and closer throughout the time and the work we can do together. As part of the work, we're going to be showing some work of Mexican feminist artists. There are hundreds of women artists. These are women who we were in touch with, who are feminists, and we're going to start. Oh, I'm jumping. Yeah. Sorry. Well, we will in a little while jump to Frida Kahlo. Sorry about that.
Monday evening, the workshop over, we're back at Lily and Monica's house, waiting the arrival of the other women for a feedback session. Suddenly, we hear the strums of a guitar and sweet women's voices rising up out of the darkness outside. After a few minutes of amazement, we run downstairs and find Jan, Patria, Monica, Esther, and Julia gathered in joyous serenade. They come upstairs singing and continued on for hours, song after song, lifting up all of our spirits and bringing us all to our feet, dancing around the room.
few days later, we were on our way to Oaxaca, December 19th. Oaxaca, the town of Oaxaca, the small city of Oaxaca, is about 8 hours south of Mexico City. And as soon as we crossed into the state, we were stopped by police. There was no border station, but just a car that flagged us down. Where are you going? What are you doing? And on and on. I could only understand a little bit of it, but the feeling was not dangerous. As soon as he left, we all jumped on Monica to translate. Oh, he was just looking at the gringas. But we entreated her some more, and finally she told us that Oaxaca is a very politically active state, and that there is a fair amount of guerrilla activity that happens there, and that he was probably checking to see if we were carrying any weapons. We were sponsored in Oaxaca by two groups. One of them was a feminist study group called Rosario Castellanos, named after a very famous Mexican female writer. This study group has a radio program every week at the local station on which they discuss women's issues. The other group that sponsored us was a political group. And these are some of the women in that group who were organizing campesinos, or farm laborers. As part of their political work, they talked to women about issues of equal rights, better health care, birth control, or child care. The situation in Oaxaca around the political organization of farm laborers was much different from what I'm familiar with in the United States. It seemed very active and very well organized. These are some of the same women who managed to let Monica get on the local radio station and announce the presentation that we were giving that evening at the Benito Juarez University. The slide presentation that evening was a combination of the two that we had given in Mexico City, because we only had one opportunity there. These are some shots from that presentation. The audience there was extremely varied. It was a delight. There were both men and women. There were the elderly people. These two women, one was visiting from the United States. One of them lives in Oaxaca for years. There were also some women from Europe who were traveling and in Oaxaca and saw the announcement. Actually, one of them told me later that she thought she was going to see a presentation on Mexican feminist art, and she got there and it was us again. She had been to the Cuernavaca. During the question and answer period afterwards, there were also some interesting differences in Oaxaca than from Mexico City. The men tended to dominate the conversation here. 2 or 3 times I very diplomatically thanked the men and asked the women now for some participation, and it was slow to come, but in fact it did, and particularly from the members of the group that had sponsored us. And one of the other sort of interesting stories is that we showed in all of our slide presentations the work of Yolanda Lopez, who is a Chicana artist who has graduated, I think a year ago from UCSD, and her work deals with the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, but she takes the Virgin out and puts herself in, or her grandmother, or a peasant mother, and whenever we showed her work, women responded to it immediately, even though the Virgin of Guadalupe was such a sacred image. They understood and they knew, and I asked lots of women how they felt about it, and they knew what it was, and they loved her strength about it. Well, at this particular talk, a young man spoke up and told us that we needed to let these women know that those were very important symbols to the masses, and we needed to be concerned about the masses. And we kept asking him about the masses, and it was extremely difficult to get any more personalized or detailed kind of information. But what that symbolized to me was an entirely different kind of political environment that we were working in.
The grasshoppers. There's a legend in Oaxaca that says that if you eat these tiny grasshoppers that you can get at the market, and we did, if you eat them, it means you'll go back and eventually live in Oaxaca. So I bought some grasshoppers, and I'm so fascinated that there's these two groups of feminist women in Oaxaca, which is such a wonderful place, that I ate them, and I hope to go back to Oaxaca to live one of these years. And now we're going into the artwork that I was talking about a while ago.
In Mexico City, we visited the house of Frida Kahlo, and it was a wonderful treat. I felt her presence in the garden, watching the play of light and shadow on plants, like the ones that she surrounded herself with in self-portraits. She is one of the best known of Mexican women artists for her work, her extraordinary personality, and the tragedy in her life. She bore much physical pain as a result of an injury to her spine and wanted very much to have a child but couldn't. On her bed sits the plaster brace that she wore and decorated with gay flower patterns. A mirror on the canopy above reflects a myriad of personal things that she cherished and seemed symbolic to me of the ways in which that she expanded her world through her painting despite her physical limitations. She married the muralist Diego Rivera when he was already well known and much older than she. As an artist, she was self-taught and painted her personal experience in larger pieces and in personal journals. This is a page from her personal journal. Although others labeled her a surrealist, she denied it and said that she painted what was true for her, what she saw and how she felt.
We've talked some about the cultural influences contemporarily, and Frida's work also represents very well, I think, her cultural heritage. Often in her work there is reference to the dark goddess or the mother, the dark mother. Sometimes she will show the figure both split or even checkerboard, sometimes dark and light. That kind of duality not only refers to her own heritage as partially Mexican, Indian, and European, but it can also refer to dualities in nature. The influence of the sun and the moon, the dualities of light and dark are shown sometimes in her canvases, relating to the significance of natural movements, and also relating to the importance that those movements played in the development of the calendars, the highly advanced science and astronomy of the Maya and the Aztec. Her house is a very small personal museum of artifacts, sculptures, stone sculptures. This is in her garden, but she also has inside the house small goddess statues from different cultures. She has her own private pyramid in the back that has small masks and, again, stone faces. This was found in her studio. It's a codice, which is Mayan writing, an early book. Sometimes they would include history, sometimes they would include medical knowledge. It's a text. And these pieces are called Judas. They as well as being very involved with the pre-Hispanic art, she was also very involved with the contemporary craft of her culture, and was a lot involved in supporting and advocating and crafts as art form, not into a division of this is craft, this is art. So she herself would wear the dress of the Tawana, and there's a lot of pottery, used functional pottery in her house, and these paper mache Judas. Oops, I have it.
I hadn't been to Frida's house in a long time. The connection and relevance of politics to her life is clear. In paintings like The Birth of Moses, she reinterprets history in a sort of the same way that the Mexican muralist tradition does. She portrays all the great political, spiritual leaders and some of the basic symbols of her culture. She has in her studio these wonderful handmade files. One of them, as you can see, about the Rockefeller vandalism on Diego's murals. Others keep political information relevant to her life. Her books are mostly about art, politics, and the history of her country. The clothes she wore of a Tehuana were part also of her politics. Along with all the Mexican muralist movement, they started at that time validating the Indian culture, and it wasn't out of national sentimentalism that she was doing it, or that they were painting and recovering their past. Her room has pictures of Mao, Lenin, Marx, and Engels, her bedroom. They were her guardian angels and kept her company. It is still intriguing to me that when North American feminists talk about her work,
they rarely mention her connection to politics. Maybe her more politically overt paintings aren't shown in the US. Maybe she is not understood. While we were in the museum, a bunch of children with their teacher came in.
And she told them the story of the two Fridas. It is a memory of her childhood when she would look through her window in her bedroom when she was alone, steam it up, and draw on it a magical door through which she would go out and find the other Frida, and she would spend hours and hours playing with her. And the children understood what she was talking about and what she meant with this. I am glad that she's being given the place she deserves as a national figure and heroine, and certainly as the incredible role model she has been for women who are political artists in Mexico.
This is Magali Lara, who is an artist in Mexico City who also worked on the organizing committee. Her work right now is she's doing illustrations for a book on Frida Kahlo's life, which is a collaboration project with some other artists. And they're also planning a film. I think it really shows how Frida is kind of a role model or heroine for different women artists in Mexico. Magali uses Frida's own paintings and collages in her own images and words. In all of her work, she plays around with words, and she uses puns on the words and using the Xerox process. And she's also made some of these into postcards. This one was a postcard. Play and childhood seem to be important in a lot of her work.
An artist friend of hers told me that her work is like a labyrinth. You have to enter it and play it as her game.
She doesn't call herself a feminist, but she is very concerned with women's art and women's issues, and she works really hard in organizing women's art exhibitions.
She is at the moment organizing an exhibition of Mexican women artists to go to Germany. Magali is also doing collaborative work, and this is recent as part of her work. She has been participating in a group called Marzo. Among other things, they stop people in the street, do street performances, and ask them to write poems with different words they have cut out, or write poems on the sidewalks. She was telling me that during one of the recent performances they had, the police came and took them all to jail, and they were left out after a couple of hours, but their equipment was taken away from them. And I've been thinking more about this, and
I think it is because of fear of the artist.
artists in Mexico being politically involved at every level. Another way in which she's involved politically, in which art is sort of as an everyday thing, is in participating in exhibitions for help for the people in Nicaragua, in exhibitions organized in help for human rights, and that's part of her daily activity as an artist.
This is the work of Herminia Dorsal. And I first met Herminia when she had a show downstairs in the rental gallery at the Women's Building about a year ago. I met her again in Mexico this time. She came to Monica's place, Monica and Amelia's house, and shared with us for an afternoon some slides of her work and talked with us about what it is that she's trying to do here. She works in a series with a model. The first part we're going to see is all from one series of hers. She likes to establish first with the woman she's photographing. They sit and they talk, and sometimes she'll show work that they've done before so that they can begin to create an environment together so that it becomes a real collaboration between the subject and the photographer. A little bit breaking down some of the objectivity. She also works, although these particular slides don't show so much, she likes to work with the female nude, and again, changing the whole perspective of the female nude from an object to much more a sense of a feeling or an emotion, to show the woman as an image of strength or
integrity. She says that she usually names the series after the woman who models. Apart from her photography, Herminia and her friends Elsa Bloom are doing extensive research on Mexican matriarchies. These last two pieces are representative of her work, although not of her series. This is her last piece. It was used for the poster of the National Movement of Women in Mexico.
This is Rosalba Huerta. She works in more traditional forms. She works in etching, particularly in drawing. And she uses very abstract imagery. She's been using the square as a symbol for a number of years, constantly using the square, and she also uses words. When I talked to her about her work, what it was about, for her, it's all about personal relationships. So the squares to her are like these animate beings in their own kind of world. They're abstract, but they're also very personal. She uses her own words or other people's poetry, and they're kind of equal in the piece. Each one illustrates or explains the other. She was one of a group of artists who went to Puerto Rico Games, and she did some pieces when she was there, and she's contributing more work to an artist suite that's for the liberation of Puerto Rico, that part of what Monica was talking about before.
This is Ana Victoria Jimenez, who also participated with us in this project in Mexico. We saw her work again when we were in Mexico. she's doing this book. This is a layout which she's getting ready to print. And she told us all about the story in her book and the photographs that she made to illustrate it. The book is about a lonely old woman who hangs near a cliff like a tree. In it she talks about her youth.
The illusion of getting married, her dreams. After her marriage, her husband beats her up and she goes crazy. Everyone agrees it is because of the bad life he has given her, but they run from her craziness. Her children, like cut-off branches, are taken away from her. The book shows a woman's life in a small Mexican town, the sexist beliefs, superstition, and influence of religion. Ana Victoria is now working on illustrating some of Virginia Woolf's writing with the images of Mexican working women. This is the work of Jean Castro, another organizer of our conference. This first piece is the most explicitly political work that I saw in Mexico. It is celebrating and honoring the revolutionary lesbian. Jan considers her work, her artwork, and her political work
into dividing herself, so that when she was using her energy to create the conference,
she was able to see that as her creativity work. This is another piece of hers. This is another artist in Mexico, Yolanda Andrade. I have two series of her photographs here. This first one tends to be like a still life that reflects images of her home and her family. I found this particularly interesting in terms of relationship of a feminist to her family. This is a smaller piece on the same line as the first. And here is a still life that brings some of the elements of her family background and her religious background into view. The central image is a saint with pinned image of her family, as Milagros, which are offering to a saint for performing a miracle. This second series is about women's sexuality, and I consider them quite beautiful and positive. They are important in terms of counteracting the social stereotypes of women's sexuality that are so prevalent in the United States and even more so in Mexico. She is currently working as a commercial photographer for a magazine called Mother that specializes in adolescence. On the right is María Elena Garcia, an artist from Oaxaca. Her paintings are rich in archetypical and personal symbolism. She illustrates her personal cosmos. The images untitled reveals that her work is about her personal experience as a woman, as a mother, in her relationship to men, to her children, and to the natural world. It is the work of her own fantasy, inhabited by magical beings, animals, birds, and snakes.
Her work relates to a cultural heritage of Native American symbolism and seems to relate to a tradition of Mexican surrealism. I also see it as a kind of particularly female inner vision of her participation in the cosmos.
I stayed at María Elena's house while we were in Oaxaca. Her home is in a working class area where she has her studio where her husband, or she and her husband, how do you say, her and her husband, well, where both of them work and teach metalwork, woodwork, and painting to the people who live near their home. They also have a gallery, a cine club, a little cafeteria, and a small arts and crafts shop, and 2 rooms for visiting artists to stay in while they have their shows or the different work they're doing there. This is part of her political activity to make culture accessible to her neighbors and to promote the general cultural life in Oaxaca. They run it all themselves with no grants and no help. And she was telling me that occasionally it does become very hard because it's a big financial and time sacrifice. But they love it and they are very committed to continuing this work. Her family, her work, and her art seem to be very integrated, and her daughters, who are wonderful, are certainly growing in a rich atmosphere. Well, when I was there, for the first time I took slides of Lilia's work on the right. Lilia has been, apart from a wonderful artist, the most incredible role model, and as a mother, as a feminist, and as a woman that anybody could ever wish to have. She's been doing art for over 25 years and has had an incredible journey. Images like this one of Estela, who is the daughter of her long-life Nana. For a long time, she made art about the people and things that were close to her. And unfortunately, this work basically just circulated around my family, which was very fortunate for me, but very unfortunate for the rest of the world. This is her self-portrait. She's the tree that stands in the front. Each branch on the right side is my 3 brothers and myself. At the top is the sun, who is my father, and that little branch that is hanging there is her creative life that had to be given up as she was bringing up her family. The road is the road of her life, with a pain on both sides and an end that can be either mountainous and rough or smooth. These are images that have sort of been part of my life and with which I've grown up with. This is a painting of the Duanas, which I was very fortunate. It was given to me during this last trip. It's my mother's version of these 3 strong-rooted women without a face, with their heads surrounded by a stone-like lace. We talked a long time about it, and she told me, and she can probably tell you more afterwards, about how it represents her position as a woman developing an identity for herself, of a woman who has been denied this identity for many years, so she doesn't yet have a face, but she's strongly looking for that. I was also glad to see her other work, her feminist artwork. She made this wreath for the Mother's Day demonstration about abortion last year. It is very impressive and large. Instead of the usual flowers, it has all the different things that women use for having abortions: herbs, knitting needles, Alka-Seltzer, turkey feathers. It has a Catholic rosary in the middle, in the shape of the vagina, the church's influence on women, and several mirrors so that women who look in can see that this is a problem that belongs to all of us. There are red flowers to symbolize the pain for the 100,000 women who die each year in clandestine abortions. During the demonstration, all the feminists, they were mourning. It was on Mother's Day, and they were mourning for all these women who had died. So they all walked up the street dressed in black, as you can see, and put this wreath on the monument to the mother in Mexico City. And of course, part of her work is also the collaboration we've worked on together in this project. Now, we're going to see some of my work and talk about what the movement has been. When I was there, I was glad to show Jo, Denise, and Florence some of the work I'd done before I came to the building when I was studying at San Carlos, the National Art School. In 1975, I showed a series of collages that had this kind of images and were the most sort of overtly, when I had more of a conscience of me as a feminist artist, more overt feminist content. And they were all hung up upside down. Some of them were torn by the audience. It was fairly badly vandalized. And a little time afterwards, Magali Lara, whose work you saw earlier, presented at the same place an exhibition of, the theme was scissors, and they were also very feminist scissors. And her work was also torn and vandalized. So then we decided we'd keep on showing all over the world, because all over the place, because our work had obviously been very effective. People had reacted to it. So we started talking more and finding where the different women were that were interested in this. In 1977, with Rosalba Huerta, whose work we saw earlier on, and Lucy Santiago and myself had what was the first called feminist art exhibition in Mexico. It was called Intimate Collage, and in it we each talked about ourselves as women and our identities and fears. This was what people were greeted with. It's called Sometimes I'm Afraid of My Feelings and Fantasies, which is what it says down there, and people could come up and open the curtain and then decide if they wanted to walk into this feminist art show or not. It was very successful, and through that exhibition we were able to get in touch with other women artists who were also we're trying to find other women to work with. This is also part of the work I presented in that exhibition. This time none of the work was vandalized, and it was presented at a University of the Gallery that is in the public park of Chapultepec. So our audience, which we've always had different kind of audiences, was the people who go to the park on a Sunday, and there's millions of people who go by. So we had an opportunity to be there on weekends talking to people who came in. This is from the second feminist art exhibition we had in 1978 that was called On Normality. In it, we were about 7 by then, we all gave our criticism on what was socially considered normal. I had this series of postcards satirizing women's magazine psychological tests about sex. Each card had 10 different expressions from joy to disgust. All the cards said, I want to make love, and that would mention one of the 10 different possibilities that are usually considered taboo in our society. The audience would then circle an expression that fit their reaction to each situation, added them up, and found out that no one who liked anything at all could be normal. That year, we also had another exhibition at a bookstore, and there was a large women's exhibition with over 100 women from Mexico City participating at the same time as a Latin American conference of women. And we had well-known all women's exhibitions before during the Women's International Year, but this was more with a specific feminist content. Then in 1978, I presented the clothesline piece in the Museum of Modern Art. The whole exhibition was organized by young artists who wanted to present a different kind of work in the Museum of Modern Art, where usually modern art isn't really shown. And we got together and decided that we wanted to talk about the city, so I made this piece, and all the little papers said, as a woman, what I disliked of the city is, and we went around different areas of the city, women from all social classes, all ages, and asked them what it was they disliked about the city. And most of them disliked men, especially the cebollitas, who are the, how do you call it? Dirty old men. And what they disliked was being bothered in the streets by men. And I had about 700 answers, and by the time the exhibition ended, about twice as many answers were up there. Women would just come and look at it and take a little note and write up, and it was great fun to see that happening. And this is already here in LA, where I like the idea of having brought that work I had done there and do it here again in Los Angeles while I was participating in the Making It Safe project, and finding that there are very strong commonalities in the things that women are expressing, even if it's a completely different cultures. Wait.
Almost. We want to end with some impressions, some things that we're carrying with us still. One of the things that became very clearly and very strongly evident to me was how limited I was by knowing one language. That when I grew up, got good grades, went to college, the only reason I needed to have another language, I was told, was for college. And the only reason in college was so that if I wanted to do graduate work, I would know how to read the books that I needed to read for my degree. And in traveling out of this country and experiencing the energy and the power and the strength and the enthusiasm and dynamism of all these other women in the world that I want to know, I feel like that's something that I personally need to take on, and I also feel that it is the one language dominance of this country is one little example of our imperialism. Another thing that stays with me, a lot from what the women in Mexico shared with me. I was trying to find similarities, I was real aware of differences, and one thing that they kept saying to me is that our movement is at a different point in time than your movement in the United States. And even though there are things that are similar, even though we have issues that are similar, we are a different point in time, we are another culture, and we will find our own solutions, and they will be different. And that's very exciting and really important for me to keep in my consciousness.
To be a feminist in Mexico City is something that can't be taken lightly. I was impressed by the commitment and courage of the women that we met, by their articulateness and their openness to hearing our ideas. I also love their singing and having fun hand in hand with working together and being able to laugh even though the changes they seek won't happen without struggle. And for those of you who don't understand that, it says extraction without pain. Okay. The personal connections that we made with individual women, even more than the public presentations in some way, feel like the threads that can connect us in beginning a network. The time that we spend in intimate sharing over coffee, walking in the market, and on the streets stand out as precious and powerful. And I'm really glad to know that the group that organized translations is continuing to work on other projects of feminist art events.
When I think of all the project, I get really sad that I can't share like the specific moments of things that really made the trip for us. There are things that are very difficultly translated and brought back here, and I'd love to have everyone be able to go there and have all my friends from there be able to come over here. We're just at the beginning of exploring all our possibilities and all the work we still have to do in Mexico, but there's a lot of enthusiasm and a deep commitment to doing this work. And it's also, I find, the beginning of the communication we can have between both of our communities to make both movements and both communities stronger. As this project is a two-part project, we're interested in developing the work here and either having the women who worked with us come over and give a presentation here, or having a show of their work here, or finding different workshops, communicating and connecting with them. So we'd like to invite everyone who's interested to sign up. We're going to have a sheet over at the table so that if you're interested, we can get in touch with you and find different ways that we can work. There's also a table over there with information on the Feminist Art magazine and some of the different groups that we would be very glad if you can look at and maybe at some other time get. And now we'd like to go on and